Carol Bornstein from our program committee will introduce our speaker, who didn't quite do planes, trains, and automobiles, but her car broke down and she had to rent a car to get here, and she couldn't go home and change, so she's still in her gardening garden. And we're going to hear all of her talk that she memorized and none of it that's on her notes. So we're really looking forward to that. Here, Carol, you can fill us in.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. So it's my pleasure to introduce Marie Barnidge-McIntyre for our program this evening, all the way from Long Beach. She has been the horticulturist at Rancho Los Cerritos, historic property for how many years? 27. Oh my goodness, 27 years. She has considerable experience in the world of horticulture and botany and restoration. A nursery consultant at one point in time. She's been involved in restoration, particularly with oaks, doing mitigation work. And she was the first horticulturist who was hired by the Rancho to help to manage their gardens, and now she's currently involved in helping with some of the restoration of the historic Ralph Cornell landscape there. I hope you'll tell us a little bit about that. In addition...
You wanted me to be done in 50 minutes.
Well, maybe a few words about the Rancho. Well, maybe. And then the crux of the talk is plants that we may all be familiar with in one way or another, having to do with the holiday season. So please join me in welcoming Marie.
You all are taller than I am. Okay, so clock is started. We're going to start with mistletoe. Now, mistletoe, like I said, all my notes are at home. Mistletoe is a hemi-parasitic plant, and it dates back into long, long, long ago. And the reason it is called mistletoe is that they noticed that the mistle thrush and other birds, wrong direction, would take the mistletoe berry has one seed, and it's very sticky and pulpy. And the birds will tear the berry apart to get to the seed, which is, of course, now stuck to their bills. So they would scrape away any stickiness on their bill to the branches of the tree. Seeds that happen to stay with the goop instead of staying with the bird were then immediately planted. And they noticed that when they did get the seed, and it passed through their digestive tract, when the bird's dropping fell onto the plant, the trees, immediately fertile, rich, moist, cowabunga, the seed is happy, 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 happy. Interestingly enough, mistletoe is throughout. Let's see, it started in the Mediterranean and moved all the way up to Europe and all the way to China. There's a couple of different species, but all that same genus. What they found is that once the seed is there, it exudes as it starts to sprout. It will exude a sticky membrane to ensure security. And then the haustorium, or the penetration peg, will literally tap into the bark of the tree, gathering all the minerals and moisture that it needs to survive. And it will take 2 years before you see real growth. So when you're taking a look at all that mistletoe, you didn't even see it for 2 years. It was just getting comfortable. I'm going to go page up, I think. Yeah, go backwards. All right, I'm going page down. So, all right, so now I'm talking without my slides. See how it is? No cue to say next. So this is a vision of how it actually breaks into the stems. Once it is growing, after that 2-year period, every year it will branch. This is technically considered a shrub. And You can actually age the clumps of mistletoe hanging in the trees by how many times it has forked. They will then produce the berries, and you can see how beautiful they are. Why was I talking about Greece?
You're growing mistletoe.
Oh, Rome. So mistletoe, of course, when do mistletoe berries erupt? You start seeing them in the winter. Well, in Greece, Saturnalia was the festival that they would celebrate at the equinox. And they would bring in greenery, they would do all sorts of stuff to say, yay, nights are going to start getting shorter, days will get longer, like the world isn't ending. And they would pay homage to various gods. Into the Roman orgies you've been warned about all your life. Hence, the Romans. Oops. Greek myth had Aeneas. Let's see. No, forgot. I think it was Aeneas who wrote the myth of no, Aeneas didn't write the myth. The myth was written about Aeneas. And the myth is called the Golden Bough. So this myth is that Aeneas has to build a new society, a new community. And able to do this, he must seek the counsel of his father. This is complicated by the fact that his father is dead. Therefore, he must find the golden bough. Well, when you take a look at mistletoe, sometimes it has a golden cast to it, especially if it's been damaged. So Aeneas finds the golden bough, takes us to the river Styx, goes through all of this drama, excitement, passion, glory, all this horror, and it eventually manages to meet with his father and get the advice that he needs to build Rome. Has a lot of adventures along the way, but the golden bough was mistletoe. Mistletoe thrives really, really, really well. Its preferred host is apple and linden, deciduous trees. But it will go into hawthorn, even things that are not deciduous. Its favorite is apple. It's very rare that it takes up residence in oaks. I can say quercus here, but oaks. When they see these trees dropping their leaves and this green shrub remains, hey, it's got to be magical, right? Everything is going dormant, and yet this is still verdant and green. So a lot of mythology started creeping up, like it'll protect you against lightning. Okay, they didn't say it was accurate. It was what they believed. When it does take up a residence in oaks, like I said, it was very shocking to them. And the Druids, who see mistletoe in their sacred oak trees, are especially going, there has to be a story behind this. So in their understanding, the mistletoe was holding the soul of the oak while the oak was dormant. The oaks were really, really important to the Druids. So mistletoe holding the soul of the oak was critical. I find it interesting that they thought that they had souls, but that's okay. Okay, now what was this one about? Give me another clue. Okay. In Scandinavia, all right, we're leaving the Celts behind. Now we're in Scandinavia with the Norse mythology. Frigg and her husband had several children. Two of the sons were really important to mistletoe. One was the god Balder, the god of the summer. He's the one shining in his glory. And then he had a brother who was blind, and he was the god of winter. So Balder had this nightmare that he was going to die, and he confided this to his mother. Frigg was like, oh, this is not a good thing. We do not want the god of summer dying. Should he die, we would lose our sunlight. So she traveled. This is going to be her traveling. Now Frigg's traveling. She traveled to every plant, every animal, every insect, every rock, every stone, bodies of water, to say, will you agree to protect life as we know it by not allowing Balder to die at your hands? And all of these creatures said, well, that sort of does make sense. So he's a god, but we will not participate in his death. We won't. Except for Mistletoe, who is just this little young thing, not old enough yet to make a promise. So she says, I'll be waiting for Mistletoe to age just a wee bit more before I go ask it. Loki is just trouble with a capital T. He's jealous, he's envious, and he resents all the attention that Balder gets. Balder was hugely popular. Just because all of these animals and plants promised not to kill him, it didn't mean that they wouldn't tease him and harass him horribly. So things would be pelted at him, and they would bounce off of him. He was a god. Couldn't hurt him. Plants had already promised they wouldn't hurt him. Loki is jealous. So he goes to the bald brother, not the bald one. Don't know what his hair looked like, but he was blind. He went to the blind brother and said, why don't you participate at throwing things at your brother Balder? And the brother said, well, I'm blind, and I have nothing to throw. So Loki has carved a dart out of that now 2-year-old mistletoe. And he tells the brother, I will guide your hand so that you can participate. The dart strikes Balder. Balder dies, and everybody gasps and is horrified. So, what are we going to do? Frigg is freaking out. And she's going and she's calling all the creatures from all around, and they're all trying to figure out how to solve this problem. She's calling all of the energy of the world to try to solve this problem. And she's weeping copiously. After 3 days, her tears, as they fall upon him and hit the dart sprouts and it forms white berries, and he is returned to life because it was her tears, the magic needed to bring Balder back to life. Because of that, Frigg immediately starts kissing everybody around. And she went to the oak tree where the mistletoe is naturally growing, and she says, heretofore, anyone who walks beneath the mistletoe must lay down their arms, embrace one another, and share a kiss in peace, that no one evermore will ever cause harm to anybody, to those who have stood beneath the mistletoe. Yay! Now back to the Druids. Sacred up in the oak tree, woohoo! Twice a year, spring and winter, a Druid priest with a golden scythe would have to climb into the oak tree and slice the mistletoe free without directing its descent. The priests below, with either a white hide or a white cloak, would have to participate by catching the mistletoe before it touched the earth. The reason being is that once mistletoe, who has thus far eschewed terra firma, should it touch the earth, its magic would be destroyed. So you have all these priests who are trying to catch the mistletoe. And then at that point there would be a huge ceremony, bonfire, singing, dancing, all this good stuff. They were Druids. And then they would share the mistletoe so every single person in the community would have a piece of the magic. And what they would do is they would tack it to their door because they thought it protected them from lightning and fire. The other thing, and the reason they thought it protected it from lightning is that they would see oaks with mistletoe that had been struck by lightning but not killed. Therefore, the mistletoe is the cure. Of course, they also thought that the white berries were the sperm of the gods, the thunder god, and that's how the mistletoe got it into the tree. It wasn't just the Romans. We also have the mistletoe man. So the mistletoe man, especially in Wales, would be in the community, and he would literally go house to house so that you could buy your mistletoe so that you too could have good fortune the year through. Mistletoe was pretty much frowned upon by the church. I did say its favorite host was the apple tree. So the apple tree was considered the Garden of Eden, the paradise tree, and who in God's creation would want this parasite that can kill an apple tree in the church? So it was basically banned, with the exception of York Minster. And this particular cathedral would actually have a whole series where I forgot what they called him. He's not a priest. He's
Deacon?
Pastor.
Vicar?
he's the big guy.
Archbishop?
The bishop, probably.
Archbishop.
The head verger, when he became nominated to that position, the head verger would then break the news to him that we have this thing you get to do. And he would wear these special white gloves, and he would handle the mistletoe, and any criminal could come to the steps of the minster on that day and be absolved of all sin and passed out from, and it was only on the day that he brings out the mistletoe. Since this cathedral minster has been in existence, only one mucky muck has refused to participate, and apparently it still happens today. How does it get to the whole, now we understand the kissing. It got incorporated into the holy bough, and that's how we have it in our front doorsteps. The bough was initially evergreens that were brought in, and pretty soon other things started creeping in there, including the mistletoe. And so when somebody would welcome them into the home, this would be right at the entrance. So everybody from the various clans or tribes or whatever, you would lay down your weapons and you would brace at the front door under the mistletoe. Well, the kissing part got more exciting. And of course, a lot of the stuffy English people didn't go for it, but we were taking peasants from other countries to do your servant work, so they had the mistletoe downstairs. Well, of course, I can probably bet you that the sons of the household probably figured out that the maids downstairs had this new tradition. And the kissing part, well, it was frowned upon, eventually crept upstairs, and by the Elizabethan time, it was well in place and hugely enjoyed. So they would hang the berries, and there was I'm not going to remember the poem, but there's a little poem that for every kiss, you must remove a white berry. And when all the berries are done, so is the kissing. I have this vision of a father of many daughters creeping downstairs at night and harvesting the berries, going, I can't handle this. But the kissing was very fun. Why isn't it moving? It's not moving. Okay, well, there we have. So kissing under the mistletoe. Try finding a slide for that. When they came to America, they were horrified that we didn't have mistletoe when they first made their settlements. So they imported their mistletoe, and it promptly died. So they did it a couple of times, and it kept dying. By the time they started expanding into New Jersey and south to Florida, they found a different genus. And they said, oh, we'll call it mistletoe. This mistletoe has up to 10, sometimes more, berries. So what does that mean? That equates to more kisses. And it tackles the poplars, and if I recall correctly, this is going to remind me that years have passed, and we have this phenomenal horticulturist, Luther Burbank, who once again imports the European mistletoe, but this time to Sebastopol, California, and it thrives. Luther Burbank was brilliant. He truly was, but he was a lousy recorder of his own work. And it took 65 years for people to put it together that he's the one that introduced it to Sebastopol. But it's still there and thriving today. Holly. Now holly also comes up from the Mediterranean, and by the time that it gets to England, the English decided that this is English holly, regardless of the fact that it's native to lots of other places too. English holly was again, what was that slide about? It was the sign. It was the emblem of Saturn, and so in Greek times, and it had magical quantities because, well, everything else around it was going dormant. It would stay green, and it would have red berries, so it was colorful. So how did the Celts take care of that? There were two gods, and they were brothers. And one was the Oak King, and one would also often thought of as the Green Man, and one was the Ivy God, Ivy King. So the Ivy King literally dressed with the ivy, wore wreaths of ivy, and he carried for his weapon a shrub of ivy that he used as a vegetative mace because of all the pricks. So he was very powerful, and he would take over at the fall and winter equinox until the sun warmed up and the oak once again took place. And it even is named in Ogham, which is the Celtic Old Language, as part of one of the months of the year in the Wheel of Time. It was really, really important to the Celts. I'm sure I had something important to say about him again, but I'm just going to keep going. Really pretty berries, aren't they? They're poisonous, don't eat them. There it is, more Celtic stuff. The holly wreath. So in the Celtic kingdom, when you became the leader of the tribe or the king, you would be crowned with a wreath of holly, and that was the very first holly wreath. And you can imagine, I'll get to that too. Oh, did I already move that intentionally? Okay, so that's how the holly wreath determined. Throughout Europe, holly hedges, because they were evergreen, they were good windbreaks, they were shelter for birds. Farmers would use them as hedgerows. But you would often see them not pruned and nice and neat as you would expect today, and the reason is everybody knows that witches at night run across the holly hedges. So if they're not neat and tidy, it slows them down and gives them trouble. So that's why we have witches running marathons over the holly hedges. In a hedge of any tall holly, you will see that the shape of the leaves actually change. And there was an understanding that there were he holly and she holly, and this is mythologically not horticulture, mind you. So he holly was full of prickles, while she holly might have naught but one point at the very tip. And it was believed that the first sprig of holly that came into the household would show who ruled the roost for the year. The problem being, the red deer would eat all of the low holly, so they were always fresh with green prickles. The tall holly were only available to the witches running marathons. So I'm thinking that those wives just let their husbands believe that they were really in charge. And it became literally, holly is just synonymous today with Christmas. And the Celts actually asked them to please bring in a bough of holly for the winter, because this is considered a gentle tree. Obviously they haven't pruned them, but as a gentle tree, this is where the fairy folk hang out, and they need to have shelter in the wintertime. So they would bring the holly into the household to provide shelter for the wee fairy folk. Babies would be washed in the water that fell off of the holly. It was considered holly water. And they would wash the babies with it, and they thought that it would keep the babies safe. They also believed that holly would protect you from lightning. Lightning was a big thing to be protected from. The ironic thing is, studies have been done, and the prickles of the holly actually dissipate electrical energy. So all of those holly bushes that were planted outside of the houses truly did potentially act as lightning rods and taking the energy away from the structure. Not sure I would still trust a thatched house, but that's what they believed. Thatched houses. Red deer. I couldn't find an actual picture of somebody actually doing this, but they would take a stub of a candle and they would float it on a holly leaf. And everybody would get their very own candle and your very own leaf, and they would float it in a tub of water. Whoever's candle lasted longer would have good fortune the rest of the year. Spinsters would wrap holly around their bedposts, because everybody knows as the winter gets dark and long and the winds creak up and start making scary noises and the old houses creak and they don't have a husband to nudge and say, honey, what was that? They would wrap their bedposts with holly because it was said to protect them. I'm not quite sure how that was going to work, but that's what they believed. Holly was also believed to have magical entities even after it was harvested. And why they chose to use holly wood was because it would tame or calm any wild beast and horse. So the wood was used in crops, in whips, in all kinds of devices, wheels, parts of carriages, because they knew that that would then protect the people on the horse or in the carriage, because the holly would control the horse. Maybe that's been my problem. Haven't been carrying holly when I'm horseback riding. And to church, not good. This is all paganism. We don't like any of this. But they allowed them to have holly on the exterior of the home because they too understood that it would protect them from lightning. And then, of course, they broadened it, and pretty soon you have Advent wreaths that are coming into the church complete with holly. And you see holly hanging on the door in many cultures. And then we get to ivy, because there's holly and there's ivy, which is a really depressing song. We're not going to go there. Ivy, too, started in the Mediterranean, and it creeped, crawled, clambered, climbed, hooked rides, and has completely gotten to the far reaches of the British Isles. Okay, which god was that? Dionysus. Dionysus was a child of a god and a mortal woman. And it was Zeus, so Hera was once again annoyed. How dare you continue to do this behavior? So she sent her minions out to find any offspring. They heard about it, so one of his nurses was the Lady of the Ivy. So she planted ivy at his crib and allowed it to climb up and hide the child, and he was able to grow to be a man, or a god. And he was a fine-looking man, and he was a partier. So one day he was partying on a beach, and these pirates spy him and go, he must be a prince. So we're going to come kidnap him and hold him for ransom. And the helmsman is going, I don't know, that sounds like a really bad plan. I don't like him. He's just giving me a bad feeling. The pirates go ahead and kidnap him and get him aboard the ship. Well, he is a god. So what does he do? He calls upon two of the things that he controls, one of which was ivy, the other was a jaguar, and sets them to attack the ship and all that's on there, except for the helmsman. The helmsman, seeing ivy growing all over his ship, is like, well, no, this is a problem. So is the jaguar. And of course, his shipmates are diving overboard. So after they're all gone, he takes Dionysus back to the beach, probably saying, please take the jaguars too. The ivy, could you eliminate it? But Dionysus showed him the power of a simple plant, something that as gardeners we've all had experience with, I'm sure. Dionysus was also considered the god of wine, but he often was pictured wearing a wreath of ivy around his head. The Romans took this to going, okay, God, wine, headache, hangover, ivy must cure the hangover. So what did they do? They harvested the berries, they dried them, they pulverized them, and they drank them. And those that survived said, that's not such a good idea. Ivy berries happen to be poisonous. So literally, the cure could kill you. I'm sure there's a great story here. In the Celtic, they understood, the Celts did find ivy really amazing because it could take two different completely species of plants and bind them together. So that lent ivy to being used in hand fastings, which was a way of getting married, and they would literally wrap the ivy around their hands. And that would be how they would be considered wed. And so a lot of times you will see ivy used in wedding bouquets because it now means fidelity. And I even remembered that without looking. Very popular in Wales, very popular throughout the British Isles. That's the moon goddess. Can't remember her story, but she's from Wales. Am I going backwards? I'm going backwards. A single, at New Year's, everybody takes a clean ivy leaf and you put it in a glass of water, and everybody remembers which glass of water belongs to whom. On the Epiphany, or the 6th of January, thereabouts, you take the ivy leaves out, and if your ivy is whole and untainted, you will have a good and healthful year. If your ivy leaf has spots, you will have sickness. If your ivy leaf is spotted and dying and decaying, you've got bad news coming this year. So it's like, okay. But the Scottish really did believe this, so what they would do is they would tag ivy on the cow byre. They did this once before.
Oh, the thunder guy.
They called the thunder god. He visited on Thanksgiving. It was really fun. All right, so ivy. Sebastian was an early convert to Christianity, and he would go and proclaim his new belief, trying to convert people. And the rabbinical courts got so offended with him, they brought him in and they tried to get him to see reason. And he said, no, this is what I believe, this is what, Christianity is the new thing, this is what everybody should be believing. So they decided that he should be taken out of town and stoned. Saint Stephen became the first martyr of Christianity, and we celebrate St. Stephen's Day on December 26th, also known as Boxing Day. When this story came to Ireland, they had to change it. It wasn't enough. So what they said is that he escaped from his tormentors and hid in a tree covered in ivy, and they passed him by. Unfortunately, as he clambered into the tree, he disturbed a wren, who started scolding him for, "Excuse me, this is my tree, and you're a lot bigger than I am, so please leave." The wren alerted the soldiers to where he was hiding, and they came and they got him and they killed him. See, they just had to embroider it. But that meant that in Ireland, what the boys would do is they would put black on their face and they would bang pots and they would take a brush of holly, a stalk of holly, and they would go about and they would kill wrens and post them on their little holly tree, and they would go house to house singing and making noise because they're scaring away the evil spirits, and those of good fortune might get a feather of the wren. That has evolved to a fake bird, yay! And there's more singing and partying than worrying about the wren. But it is still occasionally done in small villages in Ireland. Christianity was not really keen on ivy, but they did have one little story that a new shoot of ivy is fragile like new faith. An old established ivy, can you imagine trying to remove that? Is as strong as can be, and that's what your faith should become. Let's see, I can't remember his name. There was a king who fell in love with an Irish princess, and her name is Isolde. And he sent his nephew to go escort her to his country. Tristan, his nephew, and Isolde fell in love. Don't piss off a king. He kills Tristan, and Isolde dies of grief. The king says they may not be buried near one another. So they're buried on opposite sides of a graveyard. But ivy springs up on both graves, and it creeps towards one another and forms an everlasting knot of love. That story from Wales went to Europe. Somebody important wrote a story and was so impressed with the story that somebody else made an opera. And they changed the Irish name from Isolde with a T to Isolde. And so Tristan and Isolde live forevermore, bound by ivy. Don't remember. Oh, this is Christmas trees. I've often been asked, what was the very first Christmas tree? Well, the very first Christmas tree really goes back to Egyptian time, because the god, no, didn't do that, all right. The sun god was Ra, and he had a falcon face with a golden disc over his head. And he was the god of sun. And then as the nights got longer, he fell into poor health. And at midwinter, when the days start getting longer, he rises again in good health. So what the Egyptians would do is they would go cut palm fronds, they would bring him in the house, and we'd say, hey, we know that it's ending. The Romans, or the Greeks, did pretty much the same thing. Not quite as much as Saturnalia, but they got there. In Ireland, it was holly. In Europe, especially France, it was often the cherry tree. And what they would do is they would go cut off a branch, put it up in a pot of moist soil, and bring it into the house, with the hope that the warmth of the fires would let it bloom, and again it would be the reawakening, and we know that spring is coming. So there, in France, their first Christmas trees were cherries. Don't remember. Oh, yes, I do. All right, St. Boniface. He is traveling from England to Germany because he's going to convert the Germanic heathens. And he comes upon the oak tree of Thor where they're about to make a sacrifice. That outrages him. Oops, we can go back. That outrages him, so he cuts down the oak. And as he does so, he sees a fir sapling that's just now becoming, tall within the oak's roots. So he says, this is proof that Christianity is the new, young, evergreen hope, and this fir tree will be a symbol forevermore. I'm sure I have a good story.
Make one up.
Yeah. Okay. In Christianity, they often had what they would call passion plays, or they would have plays that they would literally be instructing the people, telling them the Bible stories. So one of the most typical props that they would have would be the paradise tree. The paradise tree would often be a evergreen bough or a wooden pyramid that they would actually string apples on to make it look like an apple tree. And what they would do is they would go through the village or the city with this, proclaiming, we're about to have a drama take place at the church. Please come and see. And they would literally have a play enacted, and that is how because most of these people didn't have Bibles, and even if they did, they couldn't read, right? This is how they learned the stories. There were two European cities, countries, Estonia and Latvia. And they have been at odds for much of their history. And currently, their primary complaint about one another is who has the oldest Christmas tree. And I think that it is actually, I think it's Latvia. And what they did is they had these guilds, because they're no longer warring all the time. So they're building community. And in doing so, what they did is they would build these guilds. Men had to be single, they could be merchants, and they could be ship captains. But the whole point of coming together in these meetings and forming these guilds was to network, to control trade, and to make sure that pricing was stable. They sort of took the paradise tree and took that and would go through town and say, we're having a party. Come, and they'd have a great big bonfire and they would burn the tree. And there would be singing and there would be dancing and there would be drinking. Both of those two countries and both of the two cities each had guilds called the Blackheads, and these are the people who started this. Those guilds literally have records that date back to the 1400s when they were doing this. So Christmas trees really do date back that far. Okay, wasn't really sure. One of the other origin stories was a German forester and his family were sitting down to dinner on Christmas Eve, and they hear a knock at the door. They open the door, and here's this wee small boy, frozen, dirty, lost, and hungry. So they take him in, they bathe him, they clean him, they feed him, they put him to bed. Family goes to bed. The next morning, they're awoken by this huge singing of all the chorus of angels singing, and they find out it was Jesus Christ. And that Jesus has said, he goes outside and he breaks off a sprig of a fir tree, and he said, this is for you to always remember what your generosity has done for me. And that is why we use fir trees at Christmas time. Not everybody liked those kinds of stories, and they felt that anything like that was pagan, and it needed to be rooted out. So he said, no trees, no nothing. It was literally Cromwell during the Reformation, banning any kind of celebration. And it wasn't until the 1500s that churches started bringing trees into the churches. We're ahead of Cromwell there, but we'll get there. it wasn't until, this is to show in Victoria's time how they, her consort brought in a fir tree from Germany. No, this isn't her. Sorry, we're not to Victoria yet. We're at Charlotte. Charlotte was German, and their family's routine was to have a bough on a table, and they would hang presents and candles and paper on it. And when she marries one of the Georges, she brings that to England and starts doing it as Queen of England. And she starts with a really, really big bough, and then a couple years later, she brings an entire potted tree into the Queen's Lodge and invites all of the families, everybody involved in the church. Every child got a sweet and a gift from the tree, and it was like, this is amazing, and this took off like fire. And so it was long before Queen Victoria. This is to remind me that the song O Tannenbaum was being printed and distributed throughout country, and there was multiple different versions. Lots of singing and dancing. In America, the Puritans took this really to heart, and they literally canceled Christmas. If the stores were to stay open, the churches were to close. Should somebody be caught preaching, he would be imprisoned. Anybody with decorations would be fined 5 shillings. But we got over it. And Queen Victoria really, really made Christmas trees popular even here in America. Speeding up, the Irish and the German, when they came to America, said, oh my gosh, you're going to tell me I can't have Christmas? I think not. George Washington realized that when England came to fight the revolution, they were already depleted in their army because they were dealing with that upstart Napoleon. So they hired Hessians, German soldiers. They were then billeted in people's homes. So when Christmas came, all these Hessians are putting up Christmas trees. When you put up a Christmas tree, you have a party. General George Washington made use of that when he had the Battle of Trenton on Christmas Day, because all the Hessians were hungover, and he won. Today we have Christmas greenery throughout our house. Christmas trees could have been box trees, they could have been fir trees, they could have been, there was one where you could only have them no more than, I think it was 6 shoe lengths, so it could be no more than 4 feet inside the house. When they wrote up about Queen Victoria and what she was doing, they called it a spruce fir. And as you go back through all of the recorded history, they were always, the Christmas trees were a spruce fir. There is no such critter as a spruce fir. You can have a Norway spruce, you can have a European fir. They both grow in Germany. They're both used for Christmas. I think somebody goofed up and it just got repeated. Happens when you're doing history. You're seeing these mistakes that just reoccur. In America, we weren't satisfied with a 4-foot tree. We wanted a tree from floor to ceiling. We had to be better than the English. In 1931, when they were building the Rockefeller Center, the laborers, 1931, this is Depression, they pooled their money and they bought a 20-foot tree. They decorated their families, strung cranberries, made paper chains, even hung tin cans on it, and it was the first tree at Rockefeller Center. 2 years later, it's considered a tradition, and it still lasts today. There are all kinds of different pines and evergreens that were used here in California. They would literally just go find what they could. We weren't picky. How much time? 5 minutes. Williams wanted to create a new community at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains. Buys this huge tract of land, travels to Italy and falls in love with an exotic tree that he sees there. Brings seedlings home, has his gardener sow them, has them planted, plants out 150 deodar cedars. paves this driveway that's going to be to his home, and then the land went bust, and he never built his home. We now have today Christmas Tree Lane because of those trees that he planted. Okay, I think that we should stop there. You want to do poinsettias? Okay. We have poinsettias. They're tropical. They're not. They're from the cool coastal regions of Mexico. And they tend to be single branched, and they sort of hang and they sort of are supported by whatever's around them. Those beautiful, beautiful red bracts, you probably already know this. I'm speaking to the converted. You already know what the bracts are. I don't need to go in there. That's what a lot of the poinsettias look like in Mexico that are native. We've tinkered with them a lot. We are not the only ones that appealed to them. Montezuma thought they were the cat's pajamas. So what they would do is, I don't know where that slide is. There is it. Oh well, Montezuma. They would literally could not grow where his village was, so they would literally go down to the coastal plains, harvest them, bring them back up. And they believed that when one of their soldiers died, he would be reincarnated as either a hummingbird or a butterfly. And so the poinsettias, which fed both of those, were revered. They were also used as dyes. Oh, there's Montezuma. I knew I was close. They were used as dyes for pigments and fabric and even cosmetics. The latex, they would actually use medicinally on the skin, which makes you think, ew. They have to be in that cool coastal climate naturally. This is them hauling them back up. More butterflies, more. The story. So here's another lovely story. We have two children, a boy and a sister, and she's crying because Christianity has come to Mexico, and they do the whole thing with the nativity is set out, and they enact this play where everybody goes to each house and say, is there room at the inn? And they're rejected until they get to the church. And on Christmas Eve, the baby Jesus will be in the nativity set. And everybody brings some little gift. Well, Pepita was heartbroken. She had nothing to give. So an angel appears. No angel? All right. An angel appears and said, Pepita, gather these weeds by the roadside. So Pepita, crying, gathers these weeds going, great. Now I have nothing to give, and I'm expected to give him dead weeds. She's embarrassed. But her brother said, the least thing that you can do is show that you're giving. So she remembers his words, and she takes him and she places her offering with all the other riches that the village had provided. And she's embarrassed, and she's sad, and she's crying. And when her tears touch the dead leaves, they come to color in the red bracts of the poinsettia. And Jesus is happy. There's the angel. Knew she was around somewhere, gathering the weeds. Yeah. Okay. This is Poncet. He's the one who brings them to America. Most of this stuff you guys probably already know. Eckies. The original Eckie would sell poinsettias from a stand in Hollywood. That's where he had his land. When he decided to move, he moved down to Encinitas. It's not San Diego that is the poinsettia capital of the world, despite what they say. And his family has made this a huge career. So his son figures out how to make the bracts bigger, how to extend the bloom, how to make them branch. And this is like a gold mine, because they're not sharing this information with anybody else. So it's Eckies who are doing this. His grandson also gets involved, and he does this marketing blitz where he brings them onto the Johnny Carson's show. And they talk about poinsettias, and Johnny has this incredible routine. Google it, it is hysterical. Where is it poinsettia, or is it poinsettia? And it is poinsettia, but he's Johnny. It's really funny. You should take a look at it. And so today, Paul Eckies poinsettias even not even Eckies, but poinsettias are the largest cut or flower trade, outselling Easter lilies, outselling orchids. It is poinsettias that is number one for a potted plant. I think I need to end it there, right there.
Marie, we have time for a couple questions. Oh, are you sure you want to ask me questions? Because Lily will tell you she will have an answer. But yes, if anybody has, yes.
In your research for this, did you find anything about the Christmas ferns? Because I read before they were used a lot in Victorian times as specific species, but I can't find any lithographs of them used in the home or why they use that specific species.
It was really hard to decide what to put in this whole lecture, because it was, I kept wanting, I wanted to do amaryllis. I was looking at Christmas ferns, the Christmas cactus. I was looking at all these things, and I decided that I had to do the lecture in one day, and I stopped. And then I did a lot of editing. So you guys didn't see the Yule log, you didn't see, there's several other things you didn't see.
Next year.
But so I did not find anything about Christmas fern. Anybody else? I've stunned you to silence. Actually, I know what it is. You're all looking at that table going, shut up so we can go grab our goodies. I'll let you do that. But if you ever have questions, or if you ever have a chance, come to Rancho Los Cerritos in Long Beach. I have been trying to get you to do a field trip there for John. How long? How long, John?
Hey, John, get on the stick. Let's go.
So it's just under 5 acres. Some of you have been there to do lectures for me. I've been there for, when I got hired, I thought, I'll do this for 5 years. But there's master plans, and there's saving the trees from these idiot people who don't know what they have. And having the opportunity to actually do some of the original research on Ralph Dalton Cornell, someday could be a book, someday. He's amazing, and his work is amazing. And Rancho Los Cerritos is one of his private gardens, probably the only private garden that today is open to the public. And it's a national, state, and local historic landmark. We're celebrating our 175th year this year, and we have the trees that date back that far. Come and see it.